I've been thinking about a question recently and trying to answer it for myself, that how has my creative expression throughout my life influenced and shaped my character, made me who I am today? And so I've been making some notes about this and would like to share my story with you to encourage you how important and how positive being creative can be in your life if you have a really good disciplined work ethic to frequently engage in your creativity. And I started thinking about this right from the beginning, right from my earliest creative memories was drawing on a chalkboard in the classroom at school when I was just very young. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And I'd drawn on the chalkboard, there was a line of chalkboards along the side of the classroom that were for, like an individual size, I guess about an A2 size. And we could draw on these and create our own pictures. And I think it was a picture of either a dinosaur or a dragon, but it was such that a lot of the kids in the class wanted to have a look at it, and the teacher lined all the children up so that they could individually look at the chalk drawing that I'd made on the chalkboard during that lesson in art. And it was really quite overwhelming for me, quite encouraging that all these kids wanted to see my art. I felt so good about it. But most of my creative endeavours happened at home on the weekends, or particularly during the school holidays. My mum was always getting us to do some sort of craft. We'd be doing paper mache over balloons, or making hand puppets, or doing some weaving or some leather work, or cake decorating or baking or gardening. There was all kinds of things in our lives that we were encouraged to do as creative endeavours. So we didn't spend a lot of time sitting in front of the TV doing nothing. It was just so busy and so wonderful in the things that we were encouraged to do. And as I grew older, I enjoyed art at school. I lived for art when I was in secondary school, at high school. I enjoyed some history, I enjoyed some English and other subjects, but nothing came close to the art class. That was what I always looked forward to. And unfortunately, I went to a school where art wasn't a high priority. Our art room, the senior art room, was a prefabricated building that had been shoved down the back. And so, when it was raining, we had to walk 5 minutes through the rain to get to art class. And the administration really didn't seem to care much or give much attention or pay any credence to art. It was kind of like a sideline that they had to include into the curriculum. So the experience of doing art at school was never particularly good. The experience of doing photography at school was non-existent because there was a darkroom at school, but it was used as the cleaner's closet, thank you. So no opportunity there. But as I left school, as I was actually probably in my last year at school, I met a friend at youth group, and he encouraged me to start taking some photos. I'd been using my mum's little compact 126 plastic Agfa camera and kind of enjoying that, but my friend Ray encouraged me to pick up my dad's camera, which was a lovely old 120 Zeiss Icon, and this is what I used to expose my first roll of film, which happened to be my brother's band playing at an outdoor show down in Devonport. And this was really the beginning of my photography experience. I loved it so much. The whole process of taking the photos and then seeing the negatives and seeing the contact proofs, and then I guess eventually getting some prints made from them. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that process and eventually bought my own camera. This is my very first camera. It's a lovely old Nikomat FTN with a 50mm lens on it, and a nifty 50. And I actually didn't use the camera for too many years before I upgraded it, but it's precious to me. I've still got it. The lens I did, however, use for 27 years before it stopped focusing properly. I think the glass elements inside it were just kind of slopping around, and that they'd focus occasionally. So I ended up replacing that, but a fabulous tool, a wonderful workhorse. I was 19 years old when I bought the camera. It was 18 years old at the time. It's now 60, I'm 61, and it's been fantastic. As I said, I haven't used this camera for a while, but I've frequently got another camera close at hand, and I still enjoy photography. I still love doing photography. And so as this passion grew with my own camera, I had a couple of friends who I worked with that they taught me a lot. We'd go out on evenings and weekends and enjoy learning photography with Pat and Ken. It was an amazing time. Eventually then I travelled and carried my camera with me as I travelled. This camera and this lens went halfway across the world with me. But I was still only taking photos of things, of landscapes and stuff and cars and gardens maybe. I wasn't often photographing people. Before I travelled, my sister had encouraged me, Kevin, your photos are really good, but you need to be taking photos of people. It'd be so much more interesting if there was some people in your photos sometimes. So my lovely sister Anne became my subject. She didn't really like that so much, but I think she kind of got it that she'd encouraged me. So yeah, we used to hang out a lot together. We were together with the same group of friends fairly frequently. And then eventually I started photographing this group of friends a bit as well. And it was good fun, but yeah, photographing strangers was really hard. So when I travelled, I was alone most of the time. So therefore surrounded by strangers, and really didn't take any photographs of them much at all. I hitchhiked a lot in Canada, and I photographed some of the people that I hitchhiked with, but others, one guy in particular, Pierre, I travelled with him for over 6,000 kilometres, yes, all the way from just outside of Calgary right through to Quebec. I didn't take a single photograph of this guy. We got on really well. We were quite good friends by the end of the trip, but I was just too shy to ask him, can I take your photograph? My travels were cut short. I had to return to New Zealand sooner than anticipated, and it was kind of a bit of a loose end. And I picked up a job after a number of months at the Auckland Star newspaper. A friend's mum had seen it advertised and suggested to me, hey Kevin, you're interested in photography? They're looking for someone to work as a photographer. So I applied, and within a few minutes of the interview starting, I realised I was way out of my depth, and my little bit of experience with my Nikomat, it was really not going to put me in much standing to try and apply for this job. But we talked for quite a while with the public relations lady, and she said goodbye to me, and she said also that she had my name on record, and if anything came up, she'd contact me. And I thought, yeah, that's probably the last I'll ever hear from her. 3 months later, she was on the phone, hey Kevin, we've got a position that you might be interested in. So I got a job as the illustrations department assistant at the Auckland Star. So my tasks including a lot of administrative work and running errands and filing negatives and taking clippings and things like that. But I realised pretty quickly that it was very good to have a camera with me all the time. I was out one lunchtime and took some photos of a parade of boats that were going up Queen Street, got back to the office, didn't really say anything about it, and then the sports editor came across to my boss, the photo editor, and asked him, did any of your photographers take photos of the boats at lunchtime? And the photo editor had said no, because you didn't ask for me to assign it. And I said, well, hang on, I took some. And he said, oh good, go and get your film processed and let's have a look. And so this was how I got my first picture published in the newspaper. It was one of the boats in the parade. So after that, I made sure to have my camera with me all the time so that I was ready. And my boss, having seen me take this initiative, started to give me assignments, and there was usually 2 different types of assignments. The first type, the most common, was kind of boring jobs that none of the full-time photographers wanted to do, usually an update of a mugshot for someone or just a very generic type of photo. The other type was that if there was some breaking news happening and all of the photographers were out, then it was, hey Kevin, go with this reporter and come back with a photo of this incident for the front page. This was how I got my first front page picture. That's a story for another day. But my first assignment, the one that came before that, was to go to the university and to photograph a professor who'd won an award, who'd done something prestigious. And my boss was great. The photo editor said to me, he said, look, just take your time, make sure there's some nice lighting, you've got a good background that's uncluttered and undistracting, and make sure that your subject is in focus. It's not difficult, I'm sure you can do it. So he's really encouraged me. I ended up running late. I couldn't find the office. I was really flustered. I was so nervous because I was so just uncomfortable having to take a photograph of a person that I didn't know. And so I eventually found the room, and the lady's door was open, and I knocked on the door. She was talking to someone else and standing there with camera in hand, and she looked at me and said, "Oh, I know what you're here for. I hate having my picture taken." And it was like, oh, thanks, lady. Anyway, I just remained composed, and I said to her, "Oh, just give me a minute. I can see that you're busy. I need to find a location with some good lighting and a nice neutral background. So just give me a minute to do that and I'll be back with you." And so the room was quite big, and I looked around and found a nice window light with a nice large window with soft light coming in. There was a bookcase in the background that was a really nice background for her, and I took what I thought was quite a nice picture. The real key thing that happened to me that day was that I realised that if I want to keep progressing in this job and to become a full-time photographer, I'm not only going to need to learn how my camera works better, I'm also going to have to learn to get over my shyness. I was a real introvert. I was really shy. This was a huge struggle for me. I was determined. I wanted to do this job. Eventually I got promoted to being darkroom technician, and this helped me a lot. I was learning a lot from other photographers just by printing from their photographs. If somebody was ordering a photograph from the newspaper, they wanted a real print, then it had become my job to create that print. So I got to print from the negatives of 10 different photographers, and I quickly realised who the really good photographers were, because their negatives were always well exposed, they were always well processed, and therefore pulling a print from them was not difficult at all. Whereas some of the younger photographers, some of the less experienced photographers, their exposure values would be up and down and over and under, and oftentimes their negatives weren't processed properly. Maybe they'd been processed for too long because the photographer had gone to get a coffee or something and forgotten to time it or whatever, but they were just quite often really bad. This made them difficult to get good prints from. So I was in an environment where I was learning quite a lot just through doing it, just through being there. I was hopeful, I had been hopeful that the photographers who worked there would be interested in teaching, but they were all quite closed and quite secretive about the way they worked. They were all very competitive. They wanted to get photos on page 1 or page 3 as often as possible, and so they weren't so keen on sharing what they knew. Eventually I got along with some of the more senior photographers quite well, and they realised that I was worth my salt, so they did start teaching me some stuff. But this is where my motivation for being able to share what I know about photography had originated, because I thought if I can ever learn enough to be able to share it with someone else, I'm not going to hold back. I want to be able to encourage people in this creative endeavour of being a photographer. One of the key things though, being a professional and having to come back with the photograph every single time, this was a big challenge that also helped shape the way I understood photography and the way I had to develop a really strong work ethic to make sure that I could come back with a usable picture every single time for my editor, and then later on when I was freelancing for my clients. And this, I think, is the key thing, the key difference between being an amateur photographer, when you can photograph whatever you like, whenever you like, and if you don't like it, you don't photograph it, or if the light's bad, you come back another time. When you're a professional, you don't have those luxuries, so you have to learn to photograph whatever the assignment is at the time that you're assigned to it, and come back with the goods that are, photographs that are presentable and publishable. And this helped shape a really good, really strong work ethic in me to have to be disciplined to get the photographs every single time. It didn't ever diminish my passion and my desire to take good photographs. They worked together really, really well, and I knew if I slacked up on either the discipline or the passion that I had for photography, I wasn't going to progress, I wasn't going to get any better. So after a few years working at the Auckland Star, I was made redundant. It was an evening paper. It closed shortly afterwards, but I got picked up by a couple of local papers in Auckland City, the central leader in the Auckland City Harbour News. So I was producing images for 4 editions a week, and I was the sole photographer. So I was covering everything that needed to be covering, whether it was a community event, a 100-year-old birthday party, or a test rugby match in a stadium full of 50 or 60,000 people, or breaking news events that would happen, or occasionally riots or whatever was going on. So I was stretched. I had to come back with creative images from every job, and I realised after doing this for a number of years that I was meeting a lot of people every single year, and I think it was probably in the vicinity of at least 1,000 strangers I was having to meet and photograph every single year. And this definitely shaped who I am today, because as a young man I was so introverted and so shy. Unless my camera was my bridge, that connection with people was too difficult. But when I had my camera in my hands, it made it possible for me, because I had more determination, I had a purpose that was beyond just feeling uncomfortable. So my creative expression using my camera in this way has helped me to become less shy and less introverted as I've continued to practice. If I'd only ever just been photographing my sister and my friends, no, I never would have progressed to be able to say now, if people ask me now, what do you like photographing? I love photographing people. It's just something that has happened, that I've grown into, that I really enjoy, and yeah, they do. My sister was right, my pictures are much better because they contain people. But within this balance between passion, creative passion, and a good work ethic, also, there's a tension of being creative just for myself, because when I'm working as a photographer, I'm always working to somebody else's brief. What does my picture editor need? What does my client want? What does this wedding couple want from their wedding when I'm photographing their big day? This doesn't exclude my creativity, but it doesn't give me full freedom either. And this is something that I know I've talked to a lot of photographers and other creative people, graphic designers particularly too, who use our creative giftings as a means of earning income. So it loses some amount of freedom, but at the same time it gives us a work ethic that is difficult to achieve, and certainly for me would have been virtually impossible, particularly to photograph people, unless I had the motivation of taking home a paycheck at the end of each month, because I knew that if I didn't come back with the goods to my picture editors or to my clients, I wasn't going to be getting paid for very long. So this is the thing. So if you're an amateur, if you're doing work with a camera or painting or singing or whatever it is that you like to do creatively, and you don't have to be worried about being paid for it, sure, your creative journey is going to take a different direction. If you do have a really good work ethic and you're very productive, then this work ethic and your creative passion are bound to shape who you are as a person. And I think ultimately it is going to always be a very positive thing, because being creative is something that helps people to be less stressed, less depressed, and less anxious. There's studies that have been done that show this for real, that this creative expression, particularly if it's got a good work ethic attached to it, helps us to be happier and freer and more content as human beings. And as I finished at the newspaper, I finished there because I'd been offered a job in a small photography firm, and I thought, wow, this is something that'll be really good. It was a freelance commercial photography firm that did a certain amount of editorial and wedding work and a lot of corporate coverage and work for brochures and magazines and all kinds of publications. So It was doing work with companies. It was also doing studio-based work, so product photography, a whole lot of different genres of photography that I'd had exposure to, and I was working with medium format film cameras and studio lighting. So I was learning a lot, but I also learned quite a lot about how not to run a small business, because the couple that were managing it were kind of running it into the ground and making a series of not so bright decisions. So after a year, I moved on and started my own freelance photography business. And yeah, this was also a big learning curve about getting out and dealing with clients on my own and winning clients on my own. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to do that unless I'd been photographing all of those thousands of people for the years that I was at the newspaper, because I've been so used to connecting and communicating with strangers, people that I didn't know. So it had really helped to build my confidence. Even though this was always work to me, there was always a pleasure to it, and I'm very, very grateful that during my working career I've been able to engage in work that I really enjoy. And I think that this is not something that most people in the world can get to do. You know, I can't imagine digging ditches or being a plumber or sitting in an office cubicle anywhere all day, every day. It's just not who I am. And I can't imagine as a young man ever really having any amount of passion for a routine, regular job as I have had for my photography. But at the same time, I've also kept up some art side of photography that is just purely for my own enjoyment. And this happened very shortly after I bought this first camera. I had enrolled in a night school class to learn black and white. And the first lesson, two things happened that have stuck with me. We were given an assignment. The teacher outlined what the course was going to be about, and he gave us an assignment, and it was to photograph one roll of film. And he said, please be more brave than to put a 12 exposure film. You could get 12, 24 and 36. So he said, put at least a 24, and if you're really brave, put a longer roll of film and put 36 exposures on, and photograph one subject that is something that you're familiar with. So I put a roll of 36 exposure black and white into my knicker mat and photographed my bicycle. 36 photographs of my bicycle. I've still got some of them. And this was really quite something to explore, photographing one subject like this. And to this day, I still love photographing bicycles. And a bicycle is still something that's very familiar in my life. I ride a bicycle most days just to get a little bit of exercise and to enjoy it for my meditation and my prayer. The other thing that happened during that first lesson is that the tutor put on a video and said, well, we haven't got film to process this time, but I saw this video on TV recently, and he played us a short documentary of the British painter David Hockney. This was sort of in the late 70s, early 80s. He'd picked up a camera and started making what he called photojoiners. And this is a series of photographs of a single scene that are then put together as what I call a photo montage. And I have been creating these ever since then. So for the last 42 years, I've been creating photo montages, not intensely all the time, sometimes more intensely than others, but this has been the one area of photography that I've kept selfishly just for me. I don't really ever do these for clients or for anybody else. I just do them to suit myself and my own design, and I love them and love creating them. They're kind of like cubist photography, if you like, and I love it because in a single photograph, it's a split second. It's like a 250th of a second in time. But with a montage, time becomes irrelevant because you can take your time to build up photos for a montage and include all kinds of fun things in movement. And it also stretches space as well, because taking a montage, I don't have to stand in the same location every time. And this one of the Iron Bridge in Chiang Mai, I stood on the left-hand side, I stood on the right-hand side, and I stood looking straight down the middle of the bridge and took photos from each location and put them together in this montage. I love the depth and the breadth of the creative expression that's available to me in this art form. It goes far beyond merely taking a single image with a camera. And in more recent years, I started to make video to fit into them as well. And this is now because we've got cameras that can take photo and video with the same camera, with the same lens and the same settings. And so this is a whole lot of fun. I don't do them particularly often because they're very, very time consuming, particularly putting them together. But it's a form of very free creative expression because I'm not having to fit the parameters that are provided by someone else. This I find very therapeutic and very fulfilling. And so for the last 42 years, the more I've had a camera in my hand, the happier I am. And certainly when I was younger, when I did have my camera in my hand, it really acted as a bridge, a way of being able to connect with other people. And the result of that has to shape me to be less introverted, to be less shy, to be more willing to talk about the things that really motivate me and move me and inspire me to be creative, particularly now that I'm older, because I realise the importance of being creative and having something in our lives that is a means of creative expression. I don't only take photos and make video, I also love being in the garden. I love drawing and painting, but I haven't done much of that. And for a long time, I was really concentrating on finding something that I could do that was actually separate than any tools that were mechanical or electronic. So I wanted to do something that wasn't attaching me to a camera or to a computer, but that was creative. And eventually I picked up some carving tools, some wood carving tools. Happened to be just before COVID, so the timing was really quite sublime. And since then, I've thoroughly enjoyed creating carvings and sculpting wood with a few chisels and knives. And this is quite a different sort of a discipline. It's much slower, it's much more time consuming. As I said, yeah, you can take a single photograph at 250th of a second. That's the end of the job. Well, it's not really, but you know what I mean. But with a carving, it's more likely to take me 250 hours than a 250th of a second to finish a single piece. And so the way I engage with the wood and the chisels and the creative aspects of carving are quite different, and yeah, they're also extremely therapeutic. It's really good for me. It's a great way to help me concentrate my thoughts and to really get into a flow of working peacefully and quietly. Sometimes listening to some music, sometimes listening to a podcast, but quite often just in the silence, listening to the birds or the wind blowing in the bamboo. And so I've come to learn that being a creative person and having a good discipline, a good work ethic, because if you're creative and you're not doing anything with it, I think that can really drag you down. And I do believe that we're all creative. We've all got talents that we've been given. We're created to be creative. And it's really a matter of just tapping in and finding out what it is that you feel an affinity for. What do you connect with? What sort of medium do you enjoy? You might love getting your hands in clay. You might love doing quilting or needlework. You might like knitting. You might be a fantastic saxophone player. Maybe you've just never picked up a saxophone to find out. If you can find, when you can find your creative talent, your gifting, and start to be disciplined in practicing it. And sometimes it will only really show up when you do start practicing it, not just trying something once or twice and thinking, oh no, I can't do that, but really pressing in if it's something that you're really interested in. At times, you'll discover it really quickly. Other people, it takes a bit longer, but be encouraged to find that creative expression that you're gifted with and make the most of it. It will only do you good. It will only uplift you and help you have a clearer mind and a lighter spirit. I hope you've enjoyed me sharing these stories and that you're encouraged by it. If you are, I think you'll really enjoy watching this one next. Thanks very much for watching all the way through.